The cemetery was unusually alive that bright spring morning. Sunlight poured gently through rows of towering oak trees, birds sang as if the world had forgotten sorrow, and fresh flowers danced in the warm breeze. Yet in the middle of all that life sat a man who looked completely broken. Dressed in an expensive black suit that probably cost more than most families earned in months, billionaire CEO Alaric Vaughn remained motionless beside a marble gravestone. His hands rested on a bouquet of white lilies, untouched for hours, while tears silently fell onto the polished stone carrying his late wife's name. People knew him as one of the richest businessmen in the country, but not one person walking past realized that all his wealth had failed to buy the only thing he truly wanted back. Then, without warning, a little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, looked toward the lonely billionaire, and asked a question that would change every life standing in that cemetery forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, hope, and second chances still exist in this world, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to channel name. Every act of support helps these heartfelt stories reach more people who need them. For nearly 3 years, Alaric had visited the cemetery every Tuesday morning. He always arrived shortly after sunrise, before meetings, before investors, before television interviews, and before the demanding world remembered he existed. Those few quiet hours belonged only to him and the woman he still loved more deeply than success itself. His wife, Seraphine Vaughn, had died after a sudden illness only 6 months after their wedding. Their dreams of building a family had disappeared overnight. Friends expected time to heal him, but time only taught him how to hide the pain behind perfectly tailored suits and billion-dollar smiles. Outside the cemetery gates, the world admired him. Inside them, he was simply a grieving husband. That particular Tuesday, another visitor entered carrying a small bucket filled with fresh daisies. Her name was Nerissa Holt, a 34-year-old single mother who worked mornings cleaning offices and afternoons baking pastries at a neighborhood cafe. Life had never been gentle with her. 5 years earlier, her husband had walked away, leaving behind unpaid debts and a 3-year-old daughter named Eloan. Since then, every sunrise had become another challenge to survive rather than another opportunity to dream. Still, Nerissa carried kindness wherever she went. Every Tuesday, after dropping Eloan at school, she visited her own parents' graves before heading to work. She believed grief deserved company, even years later. As she arranged fresh flowers beneath her parents' headstone, Eloan wandered only a few steps away, carefully watching the lonely man dressed in black. Children often notice sadness adults pretend not to see. Eloan looked back at her mother with innocent concern. She whispered something so softly that only Nerissa could hear. Instead of stopping her daughter, Nerissa smiled gently. The little girl walked toward Alaric holding a single daisy. She stretched out the flower with both tiny hands. The billionaire looked up, surprised. His eyes were swollen from crying. His face carried the exhaustion of someone who hadn't truly rested in years. Eloan simply smiled before hurrying back to her mother. Nerissa approached slowly, apologizing for interrupting what was clearly a private moment. Yet before she could finish, she noticed something impossible to ignore. The expensive bouquet resting beside the grave was still wrapped in its paper. He had been sitting there so long that he had forgotten to place the flowers. Without thinking, she quietly removed the wrapping and gently laid the lilies beside the gravestone. It wasn't an act of pity. It was simply kindness. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The breeze carried the scent of fresh grass while sunlight reflected across polished marble. Finally, Nerissa glanced toward Eloan, who was feeding tiny birds nearby. She looked back at the grieving stranger and softly wondered whether anyone ever reminded him that no one was meant to carry life alone. The words were simple. Yet they landed deeper than any speech Alaric had heard in years. Nobody had asked how lonely he felt. Everyone asked how successful he was. Nobody wondered whether he still ate dinner alone. Everyone admired his growing company. Nobody imagined the silence waiting inside his mansion every evening. As Nerissa and Eloan left the cemetery, Alaric remained seated beneath the oak tree, watching them disappear through the front gate. For the first time in years, he realized someone had looked at him without recognizing the billionaire. She had only seen a grieving husband. That afternoon his boardroom overflowed with executives discussing mergers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Alaric heard almost none of it. His thoughts remained in the cemetery. Not because of romance. Because of compassion. He couldn't remember the last time a stranger had expected absolutely nothing from him. The following Tuesday arrived beneath another beautiful blue sky. Alaric returned to the cemetery as always. To his surprise, Nerissa and Eloan were there again arranging flowers beneath another nearby gravestone. Eloan waved enthusiastically. Alaric smiled. It felt unfamiliar. Almost uncomfortable. Yet strangely comforting. Week after week their visits slowly became part of one another's routines. Sometimes they simply nodded politely. Sometimes they helped carry watering cans. Occasionally Eloan insisted on placing one daisy beside Seraphine's grave before tending to her grandparents. The cemetery caretaker watched quietly from a distance. He often said grief could either build walls or bridges. He was beginning to witness the second. Alaric eventually learned pieces of Nerissa's story. She worked nearly 16 hours most weekdays. She repaired old furniture instead of buying new. She skipped meals whenever money became tight so Eloan never noticed financial hardship. Every decision she made centered around giving her daughter a better future. Meanwhile Nerissa slowly learned pieces of Alaric's life without newspapers, headlines, or interviews. She discovered he volunteered anonymously at children's hospitals. He personally paid university tuition for hundreds of employees' children. He secretly funded shelters that never knew his name. His fortune impressed her far less than his generosity. Still, loneliness remained written across his eyes. One warm Saturday afternoon fate brought them together once again, far away from the cemetery. Nerissa's old car stalled beside a grocery store parking lot under the afternoon sun. Smoke drifted from beneath the hood. She stood helplessly beside the vehicle while Eloan fanned herself with a shopping receipt. Coincidentally, Alaric's driver slowed nearby after noticing the stranded pair. Without hesitation Alaric stepped out wearing simple jeans instead of business attire. Within minutes he had arranged roadside assistance. He refused to let Nerissa pay. Not because she couldn't. Because he remembered the daisy. Kindness deserved kindness. News of the encounter never reached social media. No photographers happened to be nearby. No headlines celebrated generosity. Some of life's greatest moments happen when nobody is watching. Over the following months their paths crossed more often. Community charity events. Weekend farmers markets. School fundraisers. Book fairs. Always during bright daytime hours that somehow felt lighter whenever Eloan's laughter echoed nearby. Alaric found himself laughing too. His employees noticed subtle changes. The man once feared for his icy professionalism now remembered birthdays. He asked assistants about their families. He left the office before midnight. He even began planting flowers around the mansion because Seraphine had always loved gardens. Healing wasn't replacing the past. It was allowing hope to exist beside it. One afternoon Eloan innocently asked whether big houses ever became lonely. The question stayed with Alaric long after she had gone home. That evening he walked through room after room of his enormous mansion. Every hallway echoed. Every dining chair remained empty. Every guest room stayed untouched. He finally admitted the truth. The mansion had become a museum of memories instead of a home. The following Tuesday he carried 2 bouquets to the cemetery instead of one. One rested beside Seraphine's grave. The second he quietly placed beside Nerissa's parents' headstone after learning they had loved white roses. Nerissa noticed. She said nothing. Some gestures are too beautiful for words. As autumn slowly approached, Alaric began sponsoring improvements throughout the neighborhood where Nerissa lived. A safer playground. A renovated library. Scholarships for struggling students. He insisted every donation remain anonymous. Recognition had never healed grief. Purpose slowly did. Yet not everyone welcomed his changing priorities. Several board members questioned why their billionaire CEO seemed distracted from aggressive expansion plans. Shareholders whispered that grief had finally weakened him. A ruthless business rival even attempted to exploit the rumors, hoping to seize valuable contracts while Alaric focused on charity instead of competition. For the first time in years, Alaric faced a difficult choice. Should he return to the cold, unstoppable businessman everyone expected? Or should he continue becoming the man Seraphine had always believed he could be? He looked at a framed photograph of his late wife smiling beneath a summer sky. For the first time since losing her, he believed he already knew the answer. The following weeks tested Alaric Vaughn in ways that billion-dollar negotiations never had. Every business magazine praised his intelligence but questioned his recent decisions. Investors demanded higher profits, several executives warned that his charitable projects were making him appear weak, and his biggest competitor launched an aggressive campaign to steal clients by claiming that Vaughn Global had lost its direction. Headlines speculated that grief had finally broken the legendary CEO. They believed they were watching a successful businessman fall apart. In reality, they were witnessing a lonely man slowly becoming whole again. Each Tuesday morning, however, none of those headlines mattered. Under the warm daylight filtering through the cemetery's old oak trees, Alaric returned to the same marble gravestone carrying fresh white lilies. The silence there reminded him of the promises he had once made to Seraphine, to live with compassion, to never allow wealth to replace humanity, and to build a life that made other people feel less alone. Those promises had nearly disappeared after her passing, buried beneath endless meetings and empty success. But now, because of one compassionate single mother and her cheerful daughter, those promises were finding their way back into his heart. Nerissa noticed the burden growing heavier across his face. She understood what it meant to carry responsibilities that nobody else could see. Every day she balanced 2 jobs, cared for Eloan, paid bills that never seemed to end, and still somehow found the strength to smile. She never pretended life was easy. She simply chose not to let hardship steal her kindness. Without realizing it, she became the quiet example Alaric desperately needed. One sunny Saturday, the local community center announced a fundraising festival for families struggling with medical expenses. Volunteers decorated the park with colorful banners while children laughed beneath bright blue skies. Nerissa spent hours baking pies and homemade bread, hoping every sale would help another family avoid the kind of pain she understood too well. Eloan painted cheerful signs for the event, proudly writing messages about hope in large colorful letters. When Alaric arrived, nobody expected the billionaire CEO to roll up his sleeves and help carry folding tables beneath the afternoon sun. He parked his luxury car several streets away and wore ordinary clothes so the attention remained on the fundraiser rather than himself. Throughout the day he served lemonade, carried supplies for elderly visitors, cleaned tables after meals, and spent nearly an hour helping children build wooden birdhouses. Most people recognized him eventually, but instead of surrounding him with requests for photographs, they thanked him for working beside everyone else. Watching from across the park, Nerissa realized something remarkable. The wealthy businessman who had once hidden behind polished boardrooms looked happier while handing out paper cups than he ever had standing before television cameras. Success had filled his bank accounts, but service was finally filling his heart. Late that afternoon, an elderly volunteer collapsed unexpectedly near the stage. Panic swept through the crowd. Without hesitation, Alaric rushed forward, helping stabilize the man until paramedics arrived. Nerissa comforted the frightened family while Aloan handed bottles of water to anxious bystanders. Hours later the doctors confirmed that the volunteer would recover completely because help had arrived so quickly. News of the incident spread rapidly. Local newspapers praised the community's teamwork rather than focusing on Alaric's wealth. For the first time in years, headlines described him not as a billionaire, but simply as a compassionate human being. Something changed after that day. Employees who had once feared approaching their CEO discovered he listened carefully whenever they spoke about their families. Staff members began sharing ideas for charity partnerships. Instead of measuring success only through profits, Alaric encouraged his company to measure how many lives they improved each year. Slowly, the culture of the business transformed. Not everyone approved. Several longtime executives resigned, convinced generosity would destroy the company's future. Financial analysts predicted disaster. Competitors celebrated what they believed was the beginning of Vaughn Global's decline. Months passed. Those predictions never came true. Employee loyalty reached record levels. Productivity increased. New clients specifically chose Vaughn Global because they admired its values. The company remained successful, but now success carried purpose. One crisp autumn morning, Alaric visited the cemetery carrying flowers as always. Nerissa and Aloan arrived shortly afterward. As they stood quietly beneath the golden leaves, Aloan noticed that Seraphine's gravestone looked lonely compared with the colorful flowers surrounding other memorials. The little girl disappeared for a moment before returning with several wildflowers she had gathered nearby. Carefully arranging them beside the lilies, she smiled with the innocent sincerity only children possess. That simple act broke something open inside Alaric. For years he had believed loving Seraphine meant refusing to move forward. Standing there, surrounded by warm sunlight, he finally understood.